I have played a lot of Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater, from achieving the Platinum Night 1 of Early Access, to acquiring every single rank in the game, to completing various challenge runs with self-imposed restrictions like only wearing gold camouflage on the hardest difficulty. And now I'm doing it all over again on the PC version. So if I've spent all of this time playing Delta, a remake of one of Metal Gear's most beloved entries, that must mean it's pretty damn good, right? Well, for the most part, yes. Delta is an extremely faithful remake of Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, and that is simultaneously its greatest strength and its biggest weakness. I've seen the term one-for-one remake being thrown around quite a bit as a way to describe Delta. However, I believe this takes away from the few but impactful changes Konami has made. While Delta does reuse Metal Gear Solid 3's dialogue, and cutscenes are shot almost exactly as they were in the original, there are very small changes to some of them that actually do a great job alluding to certain events that happen in later games. These are respectful changes that most players won't even notice, meaning they don't change the narrative or the tone of the overall experience. Delta, narratively, at its core, is Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. But despite having played MGS3 well over 500 times over the years, experiencing the story with the improved visuals, new facial animations, and improved ambiance really did feel like playing for the very first time. That is really the best compliment someone like me can give it. It respects the game that it's based off of. None of the emotion, the soul, or the impact of MGS3 are lost in Delta. If this is your first Metal Gear experience, I guarantee it will hook you just like the classic Metal Gear games hooked us longtime fans all those years ago. And that brings me to the presentation of the game, since I know this has been one of the biggest talking points online. Personally, I think this game looks stunning. I've seen people call the visuals soulless compared to MGS3, but that couldn't be further from the truth after actually sitting with it for so many hours. The love and care put into the details stand out immediately. Things like Snake's face paint not just looking like some flat texture, you can see the layering like actual paint brushed onto his skin. Zombie face paint even has fingerprints on it if you look closely. It's little small things like this that make the characters and the world feel grounded. Also, a side note, but I really love the new option in the menu that allows you to look at practically every model in game. You can really see how much detail they put into every single one. The environments are more of the same story. Selinoyarsk has never looked bad, however Delta just takes it to that next level. The improved visuals, along with the upgraded audio, help sell the survival and tension of being stuck in a foreign jungle with little to no support in a way that's just as, if not even stronger than the original. Listen, I love the original MGS3 and I always will. That being said, due to the technology at the time, some stuff just looks dated. For example, have you noticed that most things that should be circular in MGS3 just aren't? Take a look at the tires on these trucks in Groznygrad, and while things like tires aren't a huge deal, it shows that the original wasn't perfect and in some ways was held back visually by the technology of the time. Honestly, if Kojima and the original Kojima Productions team had access to this kind of technology back in the early 2000s, I'm convinced Delta is pretty damn close to how they'd want MGS3 to look. On that same note, I know color grading is also a very hot topic. Now, I'm not a color grading expert like apparently everyone online is, but I do get some of the complaints about how different the color grading is compared to the old bloom and filters from the PS2 version. And while I do agree that the original MGS3 had a certain unique look, Delta just has a different presentation. A lot of that PS2 look was as much about hardware limitations as it was style. Color grading trends and conventions change over time in movies, and by extension, they also change in games. Delta's more realistic approach doesn't strike me as soulless personally. It's just different. For those that do want a closer aesthetic to the original, the Legacy filter actually looks pretty great. Originally, I thought it was just going to be a static filter plastered over the game that does not change from map to map, but Konami actually went the extra mile and configured it differently according to each map's intended mood. Unfortunately, performance is where Delta just doesn't quite hit the mark. Every single version of MGS3 has had performance issues in some way, shape, or form, and Delta is no exception. Although, I'd argue they aren't as bad as early impressions made them out to be. The game is completely playable from start to finish, and it has been since day one, but there are some maps and sections where the game does noticeably chug quite a bit, primarily swimming sections like Chorny Prude or the boss fight against the Pain. The bike escape sequence with Eva also noticeably drops frames during certain portions, but as mentioned, none of this stopped me from completing the game well over 20 times now on the hardest difficulty and while going for the highest rank. Even when attempting other ranks like Chicken Rank, which require much more kills and eliminations, and many more things are happening on screen at once, the game was completely playable from start to finish. I should mention that most of my time was spent playing on a base PS5 while in performance mode. I've also messed around a little bit on the PC version, and performance was pretty similar to the PS5 version, with the only real difference being that it looks much better. So all in all, presentation-wise, Delta is all I could ever really ask for in terms of a faithful remake. I think in most aspects it does a good job of keeping the vibe of MGS3 alive, while obviously updating the graphics through the use of Unreal Engine 5. As I've stated many times before the release of Delta, keeping the story the same through the use of the original dialogue and practically recreating the cutscenes one-to-one was the best course of action for Konami to take. Personally, I wouldn't have minded if they took a few more liberties with it, but in the end, this was definitely the smartest route, and I think they knocked it out of the park. There is one major aspect of Delta we haven't touched on yet that holds the majority of the changes Konami made to MGS3. It is the aspect of the game I care about the most, and that, of course, is the gameplay. I stand by the fact that Metal Gear Solid 3 has incredibly smooth gameplay once you get the controls down. But again, I am incredibly biased after playing the game countless times, and judging by the fact that the biggest turnoff to new players are the controls, I am definitely in the minority. However, I am also not in the camp that believes that the classic Metal Gear control layout was hard to grasp intentionally to add to the game's tension. I truly believe if Kojima and Kojima Productions could go back and change the controls for Metal Gear Solid 3 to resemble Delta's controls, they absolutely would. This is evidenced by the fact that Delta's controls very closely resemble Metal Gear Solid 5's. That being said, Delta doesn't copy-paste MGS5's gameplay and then simply insert it into MGS3. While you'll feel comfortable with Delta if you've experienced either Ground Zeroes or the Phantom Pain, Delta's gameplay feels almost like a mixture of Metal Gear Solid 5 and, weirdly enough, MGS4. It's definitely slower than Metal Gear Solid 5, but the shooting mechanics are very similar. This, of course, includes bullet drop, which, by the way, definitely changes the way MGS3 is played. Once you get good enough in OG MGS3, you can basically auto-headshot your way through most of the game with minimal actual aim required. This is not possible in Delta, even when playing in Legacy controls. Again, for someone that has played MGS3 for hours and hours, this was definitely a welcome change. The way that I see Delta's gameplay balance is that while bullet drop can be a nuisance, the quality of life improvements and new items, namely AT camo, are there to sort of balance things out. It's much easier to sneak around and get closer to enemies in Delta than it was in the original MGS3. This is the case on the harder difficulties as well. Even without AT camo, the improved control layout and smoother camera movement more than make up for bullet drop when playing on modern style controls, making this my personal preferred way to play the game. Legacy style is a different story entirely. While I went into Delta fully expecting to love Legacy style controls, mostly due to the fact that I play MGS3 with the fixed camera, I feel like Legacy controls are just sort of bad, primarily due to the fact that while you can configure some of the button mappings, you can't really fully recreate the old school controls, at least not natively in-game. Because of this, Legacy style feels almost like a weird amalgam of both modern style and original MGS3. There are definitely some advantages to using Legacy style though. There's absolutely no bullet drop, and you're able to do the sideways lean like you could in MGS3, but I would have much preferred if we had the option to make Legacy style play exactly like the original fixed camera. I guess it's not too big of a deal since thanks to the Master Collection, MGS3 is available on modern platforms, but it would have been nice to play through Delta this way at least once. As mentioned earlier, the Legacy filter is great, and honestly, I think it's the best thing to come out of Legacy mode. At the end of the day, whether you're playing Legacy or Modern, the improved controls and smoother camera definitely make the game much easier. Even trying to get Foxhound is easier this time around thanks to the controls, but also due to the removal of the 25 save limit. This, combined with autosave, makes getting the highest rank in the game much less annoying. But there is one aspect of Foxhound that is much harder this time around. Konami made some balance changes around bosses that actually make them quite a step up from their MGS3 counterparts. The main walls players are hitting when going for Foxhound rank are the Pain and Volgin. Even I had quite a few problems with these two the first few times I went up against them. While sneaking around is much easier, bosses are definitely harder than they were despite the improved control of Snake. In that same vein, CQC-centric fights like Volgin and the boss have become much flashier and much more skill-based than they were before. Instead of being able to grab Volgin at practically any time, you now need to know his openings and counter him when he's charging you in order to get the upper hand. The boss's encounter is largely the same concept as it's always been. Counter her when she rushes you in order to get some hits in. However, the counters Snake can perform are much cooler this time around. The time you have in order to counter her also diminishes the higher the difficulty, with Extreme and Euro Extreme testing your reflexes and game knowledge with almost pixel-perfect counters required. Gameplay is one of the most important aspects to me when playing any Metal Gear. After so many hours, I think Konami actually struck a nice balance between making the game more streamlined and approachable to newcomers, one of their main objectives by the way, but at the same time they also made certain aspects tougher for veterans and even got rid of some popular cheese mechanics. The fear, we're looking at you, which ultimately makes the game balanced regardless of your skill level or experience. Now with all of this in mind, is Delta perfect? Absolutely not. In my eyes, it's way too safe of a remake, way too similar to MGS3, and the performance issues still haven't been ironed out, and that is inexcusable. But I do think Konami did knock it out of the park with the type of remake they were going for. There's no use in me being upset that I didn't get the reimagined MGS3 I know a lot of us wanted. So despite being a little worried before Delta launched due to the lack of marketing, I did go into it with about as open mind as I could. After nearly 200 hours, I can confidently say Delta is a great way to either first experience MGS3 or revisit it with all the modern amenities it includes. Is it the definitive experience? That's subjective and completely up to the individual player. What I can say is that Delta is objectively the most complete version of MGS3 we have had since Subsistence. Every other re-release has taken content out, while Delta finally breaks this cycle by adding most of that content back into the base game. Things like Secret Theater and the 3 new scenes show some actual care for the final product. The same goes for Snake vs. Monkey and Snake vs. Bomberman, with the latter being a brand new mode entirely. The decision to not only include but remake Guy Savage, a fan favorite minigame that was lost to time, is further proof that a lot of love went into this remake, even going as far as collaborating with Platinum Games for this new version. There's no doubt in my mind that I will always go back to the original regardless of Delta's existence. However, if I had to recommend a version of MGS3 to a brand new player, I definitely think Delta would be my choice. This is a pretty strong first showing for the new team behind Metal Gear. Hopefully the next remake allows them to flex their creative muscles a bit more, but Delta was a great way to cut their teeth and begin the renaissance of this amazing IP we all love. If you're still working on 100%ing Delta and want some pointers on how to get Foxhound rank, I made a guide that has helped thousands of players at this point. I'd also love to know your opinions on Delta in the comments below. Did you wait for a sale to pick it up? Did you already play it and did you enjoy it? And are you still playing and will you be giving Foxhound a try? Let me know all those things in the comments below, and thank you as always for watching. I will see you all in the next one.